Okay, so today we're going to be talking about program evaluation and program development. More specifically, though, we'll be talking about program evaluation within this particular talk. So the learning goals for this, what we want to do is understand logic modeling, how to do a logic model, the steps of evaluation, and evaluation theory. Now, just to note, evaluation is a field in and of itself. I'm in my office now. I have several, as in probably half a dozen or more books on evaluation alone. So evaluation is a very fairly comprehensive field by itself. So we'll just be covering the basics of evaluation. So the reason that we do program evaluation is really to understand the benefits or setbacks of a program, right? So when we're talking about implementing prevention programs, for example, or we're thinking about the organizations that you all work with, each of these organizations, each of these programs has a goal, right? So what evaluation does is basically, in a scientific way, figures out whether or not these organizations are reaching their goals, right? And so there are various levels of program evaluation. You have impact evaluation, which it looks at the societal effects, right? So how does this influence the overall community? How does our program influence the overall community? You have outcomes, which is sort of the verdict of effectiveness, meaning did our program work for the people that we were intending it to work on, right? So if we're working with an HIV/AIDS organization, for example, did our organization do what it was supposed to do for those individuals? And then you have process evaluation, which really looks at the performance and improvement of an organization as the organization is, or the program, the organization or the program is sort of moving along in the program activities. And so the question here is why or why not did a program work, right? And we can work with organizations, we can work with programs to change how they do things in order to make programs more effective. One place that we start as evaluators, community psychologists who are doing evaluation, is to construct a logic model. And what a logic model does is it's a sort of graphical representation of how a program is expected to work. So looking at our outcomes and sort of working backwards, what do we want to lead to these outcomes? What activities are in place to create the outcomes that we want? And these are the connections between what's believed to exist and what actually exists, and how we're going about creating the changes we want in the community, or with the individuals who are touched by our program. So the interesting thing here about logic models is that logic modeling should actually be done at the beginning of a program, period, without respect to conducting evaluation. It should just be done by the program managers at the beginning, at the start of a program. Oftentimes, however, this is not the case, and so what ends up happening is evaluators come to the table and they work with organizations and they work with programs, and they don't really know what they're doing or why they're doing it, which is sort of odd, right? And you'll see what I mean in a second. So you sort of have 4 steps for building a logic model. You have the conditions, the activities, the outcomes, and the impacts. In this case, the conditions are the things that basically what is the problem or issue in our community that needs to be addressed, and what are the factors that are contributing to this? What are the factors that are contributing for the need of an intervention? So what are the conditions in our community under which we need to start a program, right? Is our community have high drug use rates? Does our community have high dropout rates, right? These are the things that contribute for a need of an intervention. So now we have a problem that we're trying to address. We have an issue that we're trying to address. And so the activities are the things that a program or an organization does in order to try to address those issues. So a logic model in this case sort of goes, well, what should we do to address this issue? What are the things that we need to put into place to try to address the issue that we identified under the conditions? And then we need to go even further and say, okay, now that we know the issue, we know what we're going to do to address that issue, what are we expecting our results to be? What will our activities lead to? What are the intended results of our activities? And again, as I mentioned, this should be done at the beginning of a program, right when a program starts, or even before the implementation of a program, so that we understand the full effects, or at least have an idea of what the full effects of the program will be. And then finally, the impacts. And this sort of asks the question, how will our program affect the community, right? So now we have these outcomes, and what do we expect these outcomes to lead to? If we're working with, again, an HIV/AIDS organization, do we expect a greater increase of awareness in the problems of HIV and AIDS, or reduction in stigmatization among people with HIV and AIDS? So how will our program, how will these outcomes affect the larger community? And as you can see, this is sort of a linear process, right? So the things in the conditions should be linked to specific things and activities. Specific things and activities should be linked to specific things and outcomes. Specific things and outcomes should be directly linked to specific things and impacts. This should be a linear sort of process. And so after a program develops a logic model, or an evaluator works with a program to develop a logic model, then the program gets implemented, right? And so these are sort of the steps of developing a program. Now I'm going to sort of skip over these because I want to focus mostly on the evaluation side, which is this last piece right here. And so what an evaluation does is it goes back to the organization, and it goes back to the organization and looks at the organization's logic model, and it asks the question, is the organization or is the program doing what it's intended to do? So again, when a program's been done, right, when a program's been conducted and an evaluator gets called in, what an evaluator is doing is basically working with the people of the organization, working with various stakeholders in an organization, and really trying to assess not only the effectiveness of what they're doing, but really if the organization or the program has a clear sort of linear development of its program. If its conditions are leading to its activities, if its activities are leading to its outcomes, and if its outcomes are leading to its impacts, right? So an evaluator assesses that whole process. And so evaluation then has 4 steps. Goals and outcomes, process evaluation, outcome evaluation, and impact evaluation. And so these 4 steps map fairly well onto these four things for the logic model: conditions, activities, outcomes, and impacts. And so what I'd like to do here is give you all a running example, just so this is hopefully a little clearer. I worked with an organization in Michigan called Haven House. And what Haven House was is a transitional housing for homeless families in the Lansing area. And so their goal was to move people from being homeless into their own transitional housing, which was their own organization, their own large house in Lansing, and then from the transitional housing or the Haven House into their own personal, the family's own personal home. So they're an apartment, a house, what have you, right? And their overall goal was to try to decrease homelessness for families in the Lansing area. And so when conducting evaluation, it's necessary to identify the goals and desired outcomes, right? So when we think about Haven House, the goal here was to decrease homelessness in the Lansing area. So it's and specifically among those families that they worked with in the Lansing area. And how they're measuring that, so the outcomes here, the specific targets to be measured, was the length of time for housed individuals among clients. And what that means is, after transitioning out of Haven House into family's own living space, the length of time that families actually spent in that living space before becoming homeless again, if at all, right? And so the goal was to ensure that those families stayed in their living space indefinitely without becoming homeless again. And so we measured, that was one of their measures, the outcomes that they were looking at there. And so it's necessary to identify these things when you're conducting an evaluation in the first step, right? The target group, who are we targeting? In this case, it was homeless families, specifically. What are the desired outcomes and the primary goals, right? And those are these two things up here. Step 2 was, what did you do, right? As a program, as an organization, what did you do to ensure that your goals are being met, to ensure that you're meeting the goals of your organization, to make sure that you're meeting the goals of your program and those intended outcomes? And so in our case, right, our organization, the Haven House, they did all kinds of things. So one, they obviously provided transitional housing. So families could come stay in the Haven House when they needed housing. In addition, Haven House provided a slew of social support services. They provided rides to places, so people could apply for jobs, so that they could apply for other social services, such as WIC, food stamps, or housing assistance, or Social Security, or any other assistance that they could potentially get, any sort of government type of assistance or organizational assistance. They also provided training and education around the housing process and how to get housing. And so they really helped them transition into their own living space, families transition into their own living space. So these are the things that the organization actually did, right? And so a process evaluation looks at those processes and maps them onto the goals and the outcomes and asks the question, are you doing what you're supposed to be doing? Are you doing the things that will lead you to the outcomes that you desire? And in addition, what is learned from this experience? What can we change to make this better? And what's working well already, and how can we bolster those things? Outcome evaluation is a little different. So outcome evaluation isn't looking at those processes. Outcome evaluation is looking at the immediate effects of the program. So asking the question, did the program reach its desired measures, its desired goals for the specific population? So in the Haven House example, the outcome evaluation would be asking the question, did you decrease the time that families spent without a home? Did you decrease the time that families spent, or increase the time that families spent living in some sort of housing situation? And there's a variety of ways to collect this data, right? So you can have key informants, observations, self-reports. You can just collect archival data from the organization itself. And so again, this is asking the question, how effective was your program? Did it do what it was intended to do? And again, the impact evaluation is asking the larger question, right? What effects did your program have on the larger society, right? How does this impact the larger society? So as a whole in the Lansing area, right, did Haven House decrease homelessness, or the time that people spent in homelessness across the Lansing area? Or did it do things potentially like raise awareness about homelessness? Did it potentially influence policies and procedures about homelessness in the Lansing area? So this is a larger sort of assessment of the larger goals and impact that a program has in a larger community. So again, just to wrap this section up a little bit, the evaluation piece, right, these 4 steps down here, map onto the logic model. And the evaluation is sort of the one component of program development, and we're not focusing too much on this. So know these well, know these as well. And again, the goal of evaluation is to really understand the process of an organization or the process of a program and see if it's working, and ask the question, what can we do to make it better if it's not working well? And there's just one thing that I want to note. The book talks a lot about empowerment evaluation. Now, empowerment evaluation is just one evaluation theory. This is a point that I really want to make clear. And I think because one of the authors of the book, Abe Wandersman, he's sort of the guy who created empowerment evaluation, he's also an author of the book, which sort of makes sense why empowerment evaluation is in the book. However, evaluation theory, there are tons of them. There are dozens of evaluation theories. Responsive evaluation is another one. Utilization-focused evaluation, participatory evaluation. All of these are theories that help guide the practical process, the roles, the relationships, the outcomes of an evaluation, right? It basically guides how an evaluation is conducted. And each of these has its own theory as to how evaluation should be conducted, or its own guidelines as to how evaluation should be conducted. So I don't think it's necessary to go into empowerment evaluation in significant detail. I think what's important is to understand that empowerment evaluation is one way to think about how evaluation is done, how it's conducted. And there's several others that do similar things but think about it in a much different way. So to wrap this up, we should understand logic modeling, the 4 steps to logic modeling. We should understand the 4 steps of evaluation, and we should understand what evaluation theory is and how it's relevant to evaluation.